The Sega Dreamcast is one of my favorite consoles of all time, and also a console I have a bit of a sad history with. My parents gave me one for Christmas around 2002 or 2003, and I played it non-stop for only about 2 or 3 months when sadly it could no longer read discs properly. But hey, it's 2021 now, and not only am I fortunate enough that I can own 2 Dreamcasts plus some spare parts to keep them going, but I also managed to build this custom Dreamcast with some tricks up its sleeve that my 14-year-old self would go crazy for. Well, in this part of the Eric experiments, we'll go through this build, so stick around to see everything it can do. A while back I was browsing eBay when I came across these brand new replacement shells for the Dreamcast. They looked so amazing, especially the translucent ones, so I decided to buy one. When I was younger, I really wanted to have the Sega Sports Dreamcast. It looked so cool. I got this translucent dark blue one, which if I had seen as a kid, I would have gone crazy about it. Here's what it looks like. It's perfect. It does feel like an official Dreamcast case. Initially, I was just going to replace the case of one of my Dreamcasts. That was until I saw this thing for sale, a 3D printed adapter that allows you to make better use of that space where the GD-ROM drive used to be when you remove it to install the GDEMU. I also got the GDEMU, obviously. In case you don't know, the GDEMU is an optical drive emulator, or as the cool kids call it, an ODE. Replacing the GD-ROM drive with it, you can play Dreamcast games on the original hardware from an SD card, which is really handy and also great because it's only gonna get harder to find working GD-ROM drives. At this point I was like, what other cool things can I add to this Dreamcast? So as you can see here, I got a few more things which motivated me to do this build video. I will go more in depth through the parts as we assemble the console, which will start by installing the bottom shield and the motherboard, which is from a VA1 PAL Dreamcast. After that, we need to connect the controller port cable and the top shield, which will use 8 screws to secure in place. Now we're going to install the fan, and I'm using this 3D printed bracket because we're going to do the knock to a fan mod, as it allows the Dreamcast to run cooler and quieter. Then we can move on to install the controller port board, which I had already replaced the original clock battery with a battery socket before I even started this build. Even though these batteries are rechargeable, as these consoles get older, the batteries die and the Dreamcast loses its ability to retain settings and to keep track of time. This one has even leaked a bit, which required me to clean the board properly. Luckily, it's really easy to desolder and replace it with a battery socket, which will allow us to replace the battery more easily when needed. And here's what it looks like after it's done. Now we can go back to the build and install it. We need 4 of these longer screws to secure the board in place. After that's done, we can connect it to the motherboard and install our new battery. The next step is to connect the fan to the board, which we can do by using this adapter because the fan connector on the controller port board is different from the one the fan uses. I decided to use this adhesive cable holder to keep the wires in place properly. Now we can install our power switch. The next cool mod I decided to install is the Redream PSU. This is basically a replacement board for the power supply that allows you to use external 12-volt power supplies with the Dreamcast. That's great because, again, as the console gets older, the power supply gets less reliable. Sure, I could recap the original power supply, but because we're installing the GDMU, we would also need to do a little mod to the power supply so it doesn't heat up as it tries to power a GD-ROM drive that doesn't exist anymore. The Redream PSU solves all of that in a way easier manner while also giving us a 12-volt and a 5-volt header, which we'll use later to power some LEDs. It also takes a lot less space inside of the console, giving us a lot more breathing room and flexibility. Now let's get the GDMU to do a little test. And this is where I ran into a problem. The Dreamcast was powering off after a few seconds on. After looking a little bit closer, I noticed that the fan wasn't rotating. Initially I thought the fan was defective, but upon further inspection I realized that my dumbass got a 12-volt fan instead of a 5-volt one. Whoops! So the next day I went out and bought a new one. And don't worry, this time it is a 5-volt one. Now we just need to install it again. And this is good because previously I had also installed the fan as intake instead of exhaust, which is how it's supposed to be installed. And it lives! And the Dreamcast doesn't turn off anymore. Now we can properly assemble the GDMU, which we'll need to screw to this little 3D printed holder with 2 of the little screws and the 2 washers that were provided with the kit. Before fully screwing it in place though, I'll install some LED strips which will probably require me to move the GDMU around. I am super excited about this part because it's what's really gonna set this Dreamcast apart from others. Now we just need to figure out the layout for these strips inside of the Dreamcast, which actually proved to be a bit of a challenge. Because of the way those LED strip corner joiners are attached to the LED strips, I would end up at some point having to connect the positive of one strip to the negative of the other and vice versa. In order to solve that, I decided to solder some wires to the end of those strips so I can easily connect them properly. I also decided to use these 2 pin connectors to make the whole thing easier to disconnect in case I need to. In the end, I just applied some hot glue to secure the wires in place. And now we're ready to install the strips, which indeed requires us to unplug the GDMU. In the end, we just need to plug them to the 12-volt header on the Redream PSU, and we can put the GDMU back in place. In the end, we didn't need these 2 corner joiners. Now we can finally properly screw the GDMU in place. The next step is to prepare the top part of the GDMU adapter kit by inserting the SD card extender into it, which was also included in the kit I bought. We'll use another 2 of those little screws that were provided in the kit to secure it in place. And this is what it looks like. Now let's lay this towel down so we can work on the top of the shell without scratching it. We need to first install the top part of the GDMU adapter that we just assembled using the last 3 screws that came with the kit. After After that, we can install the 3D printed eject button mechanism that came with the Noctua fan mod kit. We need this because it adds some clearance for the fan, which is taller than the original Dreamcast fan. It works perfectly. Before closing the console, let's just use a rubber band to make the SD card extender cable a little bit shorter so it doesn't cover the LEDs. And let's add another one of those adhesive cable holders so the extender cable doesn't move around. After that, we can finally close the console. And screw it together with 4 screws. Because this case is brand new, screwing it is actually kinda hard because the screw holes have never been used before. And that's it for the console itself. We just need to add this little plunger that presses the button on the GDMU. To finish it off, we'll just quickly assemble the modem. There are no mods for it, except that we need to replace the cover to match the rest of the shell. This thing is a bit of a puzzle to put together. After screwing it shut, we can attach it to the console. Now, about that bottom sticker. Meh, I don't need it. Now we can turn it on and see what it looks like. But wait, we need some games to play on it. And because we have a GDMU installed, we'll need another Dreamcast to rip some games to load on an SD card. In fact, let's rip all of my games, as this is a good excuse to make sure all discs are working, because the only test I've done with most of them was to boot and play a little bit of the games, which means that I have no idea if there are bad sectors on the discs. Alright, in order to rip the discs, we're gonna use DreamShell, which is an Unix-like operating system for the Dreamcast that contains a bunch of useful tools, one of them being the GD Ripper, which we'll use to rip GD-ROMs to an SD card using this handy-dandy adapter to connect it to the serial port of the Dreamcast. In order to do that, I'll download DreamShell on my desktop. After doing that, we need to burn the boot CD image to a blank CD. Now we can prepare an SD card, ideally no bigger than 16 GB so we don't have issues running DreamShell. The first thing that we need to do is to format it into FAT32. Now, your SD card is probably already formatted in FAT32, so you'd think that's enough. Well, no. For some reason I actually ran into some issues with the DreamShell boot not detecting the SD card partition after formatting it with Windows or macOS. After searching on the web for a while, I found in a forum discussion, I don't remember where, that using the SD card formatter, which is available in the sdcard.org website, solves all those issues. Don't ask me why that's the case, I have no idea, but it does indeed work. After formatting the SD card, we can copy the DreamShell files to its root folder. Then we just need to put it in the adapter, connect it to the Dreamcast, put the boot CD in, and turn the console on. Now we should be able to rip the games. I mean, except that I couldn't. Between having read errors with discs that I know are working for sure, and DreamShell downright crashing a couple of times, I was having a lot of issues with my PAL Dreamcast. I think its GD-ROM drive is starting to give up and there's some issue with its serial port. So I decided to try it with my Japanese Dreamcast instead. I just need to connect the AV cable, the power cable, the serial adapter, and... What? What? Don't press that power button. Why? That's a Japanese Dreamcast. It runs on 120 volts. If you turn that thing on, you're gonna burn it because we're in a PAL country. Nah, don't worry about it. I replaced the power supply of this Dreamcast with the one from the Dreamcast I disassembled to build a new one. So this one's gonna work fine with 240 volts. Oh, okay. Never mind then. Sorry. Carry on. Cool. Seriously though, in case you have ever wondered, Japanese or American Dreamcast will work just fine with the power supply from a PAL one. Now we can finally start ripping our games, which is very easy. After the Dreamcast is booted into Dreamshell, we need to go into the GD Ripper. Then we replace the Dreamshell boot disk with a game. After that, we click on read name from CD so the tool can detect the name of the game and use it as the folder the game will be dumped into our SD card. And then after that, we just need to press start and wait around 30 to 40 minutes per game. Yep, this part of the process is a bit painful, but the cool thing about it is that you don't need to restart the console to rip the next game, you just have to replace the disc when it's done. Press read name from CD again and press start. Okay, that montage was a lot of work and it turned out pretty cool. However, as smooth as the process may have looked there, it wasn't without its hiccups. I actually had 3 discs failing on me. The first disc from Shenmue, the second disc from Resident Evil Code Veronica, and Worms Armageddon. I tried to see if I would have better luck with the Dreamcast SD Ripper by JJ1Dom, but that didn't work either. I will have to replace those discs, which, by the way, I have already tried with Resident Evil Code Veronica, but the second disc from the new pair I bought on eBay had issues too. So for now I'll have to skip those games, which is okay because I still have plenty of games to play. Now, after copying all of those games to my computer, which we have to do in batches because I wouldn't be able to fit all of them in a single 16GB SD card, we can go on to prepare the SD card for the GDEMU, which for now is a 32GB one I had lying around. Next, we need to use a little piece of software called SD Card Maker for GDEMU, which serves the purpose of, well, making the SD card for the GDEMU. This part is super easy. We just need to drag all of our game folders into the program, making sure the SD card is the drive selected on the top. We need to also make sure we have the menu checkbox selected so the software can create the menu we'll use to select games. We're also able to patch games so they are region free and they can run on VGA. After that, we just need to press save, and the program will write all the games on the SD card. We just need to be patient here because that can take a while. And now, the moment that we all have been waiting for. We can finally turn this thing on to see what it looks like. Wow, it looks amazing! Let's load up some games to play, like one of my favorites, Virtua Tennis. I'm usually not a huge fan of sports games, but I love Virtua Tennis. And what about a bit of Crazy Taxi, which is one of the biggest classics on the Dreamcast. This is actually a game I only first played after my old Dreamcast stopped working, and it's an awesome game. Growing up in Brazil, we always bought pirated games because original games were super expensive. Come to think of it, aside from rental places, I don't think I knew anyone who owned original CD or DVD based games until the PS3 came along. If you told me at that time I could have dozens or hundreds of games in such a small thing like an SD card, I would have been mind blown. Now, I don't condone video game piracy, that was a reality from a different time in a completely different place. So my plan here is to play the games I already own from backups, as I don't trust GD-ROM drives in the long run, and I can use the other Dreamcasts I own only for ripping so I can preserve their drives. Man, Unreal Tournament is a game I love on the PC, and I had always been curious about the Dreamcast version. Now I can say that playing it here on the Dreamcast with the controller is clunky as hell. It kinda sucks I can't play Resident Evil Code Veronica right now, but I can play Resident Evil 3. It's clearly just a port of the PS1 version, but it was on the Dreamcast that I finished this game for the first time. I still need to finish Code Veronica though, because I was in the middle of that game when my old Dreamcast started failing. So yeah, as I mentioned in the intro, when I was younger, around 2002 or 2003, I really wanted to have a Dreamcast. At that point, I had already experienced the PS2 and the GameCube, but I wasn't really aware the Dreamcast had already been discontinued, and I remember seeing one at a storefront running Sonic Adventure maybe 2 or 3 years prior and being mind blown by the graphics. That left a huge impression on me. At that time, I didn't have a job though, and my parents struggled a lot with money. We never had enough, especially for such expensive things like video game consoles. So you can imagine how mind blown I was when they actually managed to get me one for Christmas. And I do know they were super excited that they managed to buy such a great Christmas gift for me. I was so happy. I played that thing a lot for a solid 2-3 months or so when sadly, as I mentioned before, the disk drive started failing. One of the reasons for that were the pirated games I mentioned before. The Dreamcast is notorious for having issues over time when reading poorly made pirated discs, but surely the console would have lasted more than 3 months or so even with pirated discs. I think the main problem was with where my parents got that console from. You see, in Brazil we have these big markets with various vendors and a lot of them are super dodgy. A lot of those vendors sell electronics, with some of them being specialized in video game stuff, and their prices are usually a lot cheaper than buying from legitimate stores. For that reason, my parents went to one of them to buy that Dreamcast. The problem is that it's really hard to know where they got their stock from, and it could have easily been a very well used Dreamcast, maybe a display unit that had a pirated disc being read 12 hours a day, or even a stolen unit. And not being a legitimate store, you can forget about returns, exchanges, or any kind of warranty for that matter. Needless to say, I was pretty bummed by that, but really, I can't imagine how my parents felt. All they wanted was to treat their kid with a great Christmas gift, and I know they were really heartbroken because one of the few times they managed to do so, it was a complete failure. But even at that time, I really appreciated what they did, and I made sure over the years to let them know I did, because even without the means, they really tried to shield us and to give us the best life that they could. Anyways, I didn't mean for this to get emotional, I just think it's a story worth telling. And now that I am an adult with some disposable income, I can enjoy those things I couldn't properly when I was a kid, and that's awesome. Now, if you are into the Dreamcast modding scene, you might be wondering why I didn't install one of the HDMI mods, and I have a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that I don't have the level of soldering skills necessary to do such a mod, so I'm not gonna risk my hardware. The second reason is that I don't really like modifying console shells unless it's absolutely necessary. I think that goes a bit against preservation. And yeah, I know, this shell is not an official one, but still, I'm not a big fan of doing that. The last reason is that I connect all of my retro consoles via SCART to a Hydra 2 SCART switcher, which goes into a RetroTink SCART, resulting in one HDMI for all of them. That's good because HDMI switches with more than 5 inputs are hard to find, expensive, and the idea of chaining a bunch of HDMI switches to get all of the inputs I need if all of my consoles were HDMI capable gives me the heebie-jeebies. So I decided not to do that mod. But hey, you can still get amazing video quality with RGB SCART, which is great. And there you have it. I'm super happy with how this Dreamcast turned out. I wouldn't call it the ultimate Sega Dreamcast because I think a lot of people would disagree with me because it doesn't have an HDMI mod. I do feel, however, it's the ultimate Dreamcast for me at this point in my life, and I think we can all agree it looks amazing. And the best part is that I'll be able to play Dreamcast games without causing wear to the GD-ROM drives from my other Dreamcasts, allowing them to last a lot longer. That's great because I love the idea of every now and then being able to experience my retro consoles like they were originally. And that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like it, and if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to check out my other videos and subscribe for more content around retro gaming, retro computing, and other stuff I find interesting. Thanks for watching.